The night began quietly, which later made it harder to believe it had ever happened. Station Helios 9 drifted in open space, far from any planet, wrapped in artificial light and routine. Every hallway looked the same. Every system followed schedule. To most of the crew, it was just another cycle of work and rest. Elias Mar stood alone near the observation window, watching distant stars slide past like slow memories. He had finished his shift early. Humans often did extra work without being asked, not because they were ordered to, but because silence made them uneasy. Helios 9 was not built for humans. The station belonged mostly to alien species that valued control, logic, and emotional distance. Humans were tolerated, sometimes respected, but never fully trusted. Elias understood that. He had learned long ago to keep his thoughts quiet and his emotions hidden. Still, that night, something felt wrong. The stars outside looked dimmer, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. No alarm followed. That alone was terrifying. The station systems were designed to scream at the smallest failure. When silence came instead, it felt unnatural. Elias straightened, his body reacting before his mind could explain why. Across the corridor, a group of Virelian officers stopped walking. They were tall, pale, and usually calm to the point of coldness. Their eyes shifted toward the ceiling panels, listening for a warning that never arrived. "What is the delay?" one of them asked softly. The station did not answer. Gravity wavered for half a second. It was enough to send loose tools floating, enough to make Elias' stomach twist. Somewhere far below, metal groaned like it was being bent by invisible hands. A low vibration passed through the floor. Elias felt it in his bones. The Virelians froze. They waited for data, for confirmation, for permission. Elias moved. He ran. His boots struck the floor harder than station rules allowed, but he didn't slow down. He passed sealed doors and dark panels, his breath sharp in his chest. The air smelled different now, heated, strained. When he reached the auxiliary corridor, he found two crew members trapped behind a half-closed bulkhead. The door controls were dead. One of them looked at Elias with wide eyes. "We are instructed to wait." Elias grabbed the manual lever. "Waiting won't open it," he said. The metal resisted. His hands burned as he pulled. Pain shot up his arms, but the door moved slowly, screaming in protest. With one final effort, he forced it open enough for them to crawl through. Blood dripped from his palms. No one thanked him. They were too shocked. As Elias sealed the corridor behind them, the station lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed Helios 9. Emergency glow panels flickered to life seconds later, bathing the halls in red. Somewhere far away, a deep sound echoed, not mechanical, not alive, but something vast. Elias turned toward the observation ring. He didn't know why. He only knew that whatever was happening could not be understood from inside the walls. When he reached the window, his heart nearly stopped. Something massive blocked the stars. It was not shaped like a ship. It did not move with engines. It drifted like a shadow made of light, wrapping around the station as if Helios 9 were a small object caught in a slow tide. Elias pressed his hand to the glass. "This isn't an attack," he whispered, though no one was there to hear him. The station remained silent. The logs stopped recording. Cameras showed nothing but static. Somewhere in the system memory, this entire night was already being erased. Elias stood alone in the red glow, staring into the dark. He didn't know it yet, but the universe had just placed a choice in human hands. And humans were never good at standing still. The hum of the station was gone. Only the low red glow from emergency panels painted the corridors in faint light. Every step Elias took echoed like a warning. He could hear it, his own pulse, fast and sharp, against the cold rhythm of the station. The Violians, who normally moved with precise control, were frozen. Their long limbs trembled as if gravity itself had become a threat. Their pale faces, usually serene and unreadable, were etched with fear. They looked to one another, then to the broken systems, expecting someone, anyone, to give the correct answer. But no answer came. Elias didn't wait. Humans rarely did. He had learned long ago that hesitation killed more than courage ever could. He grabbed one of the Violians by the arm, trying to move them toward the auxiliary corridor. "You have to move," he urged. His voice sounded strange even to him, louder than usual, tense and raw. One of them, Commander Vey, shook his head. "We are not permitted. We must wait for logic, for order." Elias shook him again. "Logic is dead, order is gone. Survival isn't permission, it's action." Vey froze for a moment, eyes wide, as though processing a new kind of instinct, one they did not trust. Humans acted without waiting for calculations, without asking permission from a system or a chain of command. It was reckless, it was terrifying, and it was working. He dragged them both to the manual hatch that led to the maintenance tunnels. The lever was stiff, rusted from years of neglect. Elias' hands ached, bleeding from the effort, but he gritted his teeth and pulled. The metal resisted like it had a mind of its own. A loud, grinding screech echoed through the station as the bulkhead shifted. Alarm lights flickered and died again, swallowed by darkness. Elias pulled harder. One of the Violians gasped, their pale skin streaked with sweat. "Do you feel it?" Elias asked, though he did not wait for an answer. "It's not going to wait for us." Finally, the hatch opened, and he shoved them through. Their long arms flailed, grabbing onto edges, their feet barely finding hold in the narrow tunnel. Elias followed, slamming the hatch shut behind them. For a moment, all was silent except the distant vibration through the walls. The station groaned as if alive, as if it could sense the human presence. Elias' lungs burned. Every nerve screamed. He wanted to collapse, but he could not. Somewhere in the darkness, something massive brushed against the station's hull. Not a ship, not an engine, something far older, far stranger. Its presence pressed against the walls, bending the metal slightly, humming through the corridors. Elias clenched his fists. He had no idea what it was, only that staying still would mean certain death for everyone. Humans understood that instinctively. Others, the calm species, the logical ones, they froze. They calculated, they hesitated, they waited for the right protocol, the right order, the right answer. Humans did not wait. Humans moved. Humans improvised, and tonight that choice would be everything. Through the tunnels, Elias led the Violians deeper into the maintenance sections. Sparks flew from damaged conduits. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal. One of the Violians whispered, "I have never felt fear like this." "Good," Elias replied softly. "You need to feel it. You need to move through it. That's how humans survive." He paused at a junction where the corridors split. His mind raced. One path led to life support systems, another to the external control deck. He had no plan, no calculation, only instinct and courage. Elias made his choice. He took the path toward the control deck, where the station's energy systems could still be accessed. If the creature outside the hull wanted energy, he would give it, on human terms. The Violians followed reluctantly, still trembling, still unsure. They had been trained to trust data, to follow rules, to remain calm under any circumstance. But the rules were gone. The data was gone. Only one thing remained: Elias. And humans, for better or worse, were never quiet when everything else fell apart. That night in the silent corridors of Helios 9, a human led the frozen calm through fear, showing them what it meant to act when no one else could. The first step had been taken. The night was far from over. Elias reached the observation deck and froze. The view outside was no longer stars and darkness. Something enormous hovered beside Helios 9, stretching beyond the window frame, a shape that made no sense and yet demanded recognition. It was not a ship, not a known life form. It shimmered like liquid shadow, pulsing with faint streaks of light, as if the universe had folded itself around the station. The first instinct was to step back, but Elias didn't. Humans rarely did what was expected. He pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the vibrations through the reinforced material. There was no anger in the presence, no sound beyond the low hum that echoed inside his chest. Yet the being's enormity was a warning all on its own. The alien crew members behind him murmured, whispers of panic hidden in the throats they did not know how to use. It, it shouldn't exist here, one of the Virelians said, voice cracking. Elias shook his head. It doesn't care where it exists. We have to make it leave or we die. They stared at him. Some understood logic, some waited for orders, but none were ready to act. And that was fine. Humans thrived where others hesitated. Elias moved toward the external control panel, the one that monitored the station's energy systems. If he could direct power outward, he might distract the being enough to save the hull. He didn't fully understand how it worked. He only knew it had to be done. The alien crew protested. It is too dangerous. You cannot survive outside. He didn't answer. His boots struck metal floors as he ran through corridors, bypassing sections where gravity flickered dangerously. Sparks rained from damaged conduits. A section of the hull shuddered, making the whole station groan. Every second counted. When Elias reached the core console, he placed his hands on the panels, feeling heat and power vibrating beneath his fingers. Systems that should have been offline flickered to life as he rerouted energy. He didn't understand fully what each lever and dial did. He only knew the outcome mattered more than method. Outside, the being responded. It rippled, stretching its shadowy form along the hull, absorbing the light and energy being directed at it. Elias' heart raced. The human capacity for risk was greater than any calculation. He could feel fear, sharp and biting, but also clarity. This was the point humans excelled at, moving when waiting would kill. A sudden jolt shook the deck. Alarms tried to scream but had no effect. Gravity fluctuated violently. Elias clung to the console, sweat streaking his face. One of the Virelians behind him fell, arms flailing. Elias grabbed him without hesitation, pulling him to safety. The creature's pulsing light intensified. It circled the station slowly, almost curious. Elias realized something impossible. It was not attacking. It was investigating. It wanted energy, not destruction. Understanding this changed everything. You can't negotiate with it, but you can give it what it needs, Elias whispered to himself. He rerouted more power, risking a full overload. If he miscalculated, the station would tear apart. The aliens watched in awe. For the first time, they saw human courage, not in compliance or calculation, but in instinct. Humans acted without certainty, and somehow it worked. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The station trembled, but Elias didn't waver. He felt exhaustion claw at him, but he pushed forward. His mind focused entirely on survival, not just for himself, but for the crew who relied on him without realizing it. Then slowly the being recoiled. It absorbed the redirected energy and began to move away from Helios 9. The station trembled violently one last time, then stilled. Emergency lights returned to normal. Gravity stabilized. The air, once thick with fear, cleared. Elias sank to the floor, chest heaving. Behind him, the alien crew stared, pale and silent. No one spoke. Their calm, perfect species had watched a human take action when nothing else made sense, and the impossible had worked. Humans, Elias realized, did not wait for instructions, logic, or rules. They moved. They survived. And sometimes survival itself was enough to change everything. That night, the crew of Helios 9 learned a simple truth. A human could face the unimaginable and bend it, not through technology, not through logic, but through courage, instinct, and relentless action. Elias wiped sweat from his brow, looking once more at the fatting shadow outside the hull. He had no idea what had just passed, only that the station, and everyone in it still lived because he acted. The station hummed faintly as Elias stood at the external control deck, his hands still trembling from the encounter. The shadowy being had moved away, but the danger was far from over. Helios 9 had been pushed to its limits. The power systems were unstable, wires sparking and groaning. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the station could tear itself apart. The alien crew gathered behind him, whispering in low tones. They were experts in logic, experts in control, yet none of them could make the choice that had just saved the station. Their species were trained to follow orders, to calculate risk, to defer action until certainty existed. But certainty had vanished with the flickering lights, leaving only instinct. Elias knew what had to be done next. The station's core could be overloaded in a controlled release. A surge of energy directed outward would stabilize the systems and ensure survival. But the procedure was dangerous. It required someone to stay behind to trigger it manually. He looked at the crew. No one moved. They argued, calculated, hesitated. The Virelian commander, usually calm and precise, spoke softly. "It is illogical to risk a single life when the systems can be contained remotely." Elias shook his head. "There's no remote solution left. If we wait, the station dies and everyone dies with it." The room went quiet. Machines buzzed weakly, panels flickered. The emergency red glow illuminated pale faces and tense eyes. No one stepped forward. No one volunteered. They were frozen by the weight of responsibility, bound by rules, waiting for an answer that could not exist. Humans, Elias realized, did not wait for permission. Humans acted. Humans accepted risk because survival demanded it. He locked the door behind him. Metal clicked into place. Panic flashed in the eyes of the crew, but Elias did not flinch. He began preparations for the core overload. Each lever and dial seemed foreign, but he trusted his instincts. Every motion was precise, every decision made in a heartbeat. Before activating the core, he recorded a message. Not for fame, not for glory, just in case no one survived to explain. His voice was steady, though exhaustion and fear threatened to break it. "This is Elias Mar," he said softly. "If this message is found, know that I chose life for the crew. I do not call this bravery, I call it necessary. Humans survive when waiting fails. Humans move when all else freezes. That is all." He pressed the record off button and turned back to the console. Sparks rained from overloaded conduits, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating in his chest. Outside, the being's residual energy lingered, almost watching. Elias felt no anger, no desire for revenge, only the pressing need to act. Minutes stretched like hours. He adjusted the dials, redirected power, and waited for the precise moment. The core pulsed with a dangerous glow. Every panel indicated instability. One wrong touch and the station could collapse, tearing them all into the void. He thought of the crew outside, their faces pale and uncertain, trusting him despite their fear. He thought of the countless human ancestors who had survived impossible odds, not by caution, but by movement, by courage, by stubborn refusal to surrender. His hand hovered over the final lever. Elias took a deep breath, feeling exhaustion, fear, and determination blend into a singular clarity. The room felt alive, the station vibrating under his grip, as if it understood the choice he was about to make. When he pulled the lever, energy surged, filling the room with light and heat. The station trembled violently, alarms screaming weakly in protest. Outside, the shadow moved again, stretching and reacting to the pulse of energy. Elias braced himself, heart hammering, knowing that nothing in logic could predict the outcome. He did not care. Humans had acted when no other species could. That action was the only thing that mattered. As the core released its final surge, Elias felt the station shudder and then settle. For a moment, silence returned. The lights flickered back to life, faint and steady. Gravity normalized. The crew outside the door gasped, relieved but still unsure. The station had survived, not through calculation, not through protocol, but through human instinct, courage, and refusal to stand still. Elias sank to the floor, his body aching, hands scorched, but his mind calm. Humans, he realized once again, were dangerous to despair and dangerous to underestimate. The choice had been made, the station had survived, and once more humans had proven they could move when all else froze. The station was quiet now, too quiet. Even the hum of emergency systems felt muted, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it. Elias sank to the floor, muscles trembling, sweat and dust coating his burned hands. He could hear the faint shuffling of the alien crew outside the control deck, their footsteps careful, hesitant. They were alive, but their minds were still struggling to process what had just happened. Officially, the night never existed. The system logs had been wiped. The cameras had shown only static. Helios 9's records would claim a minor energy fluctuation had passed harmlessly, leaving the crew completely unaware. But Elias remembered every detail. Every flash of light, every pulse of energy, every moment the station shuddered as if it were a living thing. The alien crew stared at him, pale faces reflecting relief and awe. They had watched him act when logic had frozen them, when protocol had failed. Their species prided themselves on perfect decision-making, flawless reasoning, but none had moved. None had dared. All had waited. And yet here they were, alive. Not because they followed rules, not because they calculated probabilities, but because one human had acted. Elias struggled to his feet, feeling the burn in his legs, the ache in his arms, the pounding of his heart. He knew the Virelians were starring, trying to understand something they had no concept of: instinctive courage, the type of decision-making that ignored fear in favor of necessity. One of them, Commander Vey, finally spoke. "How did you know what to do?" Elias wiped a streak of blood from his forehead and met the pale eyes. "I didn't. I just moved. That's what humans do when waiting kills everyone." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavy with meaning. For the alien crew it was incomprehensible. They calculated, they hesitated, they analyzed endlessly. But sometimes calculation was useless. Survival required action. Humans were built for that. Elias walked to the observation window, scanning the stars. Outside, nothing remained of the shadowy being. It had absorbed the energy, drifted away, and vanished into the void. Helios 9 had survived, intact. The hull was slightly scorched, panels dented, but the station itself was whole. No one mentioned what had just occurred. No one recorded Elias' role. The system logs, already sanitized, would tell only the official story. But that was never important. Humans did not act for recognition. They acted because doing nothing was not an option. He returned to the control deck, checking the panels. All systems were stabilizing. Gravity was normal. Life support was running again. The aliens watched, still silent, their minds whirring with the realization that their species had failed where a human had succeeded. A junior engineer dared to ask, "If we follow protocol, could we have survived?" Elias shook his head. "Protocol doesn't survive the unexpected. Humans do." The Virelians absorbed this quietly. It was a lesson they could not fully articulate, a truth too instinctive, too raw for their structured minds. Humans were unpredictable, dangerous, terrifying, and yet undeniably capable. Hours later, when the crew finally began repairs, Elias remained at the console. He was exhausted beyond belief, yet he felt an odd calm. The human mind, he realized, could process fear and action simultaneously in a way no alien logic could replicate. He had faced the unimaginable and survived, not because of strategy, but because he had moved. By morning, the station's automated systems had restarted. Emergency logs were written, and Helios 9 appeared normal to any incoming inspection. But the human crew member, Elias Mar, remained quietly aware of the truth. They had all survived that night because of instinct, courage, and the willingness to act when all others froze. The alien crew would never fully understand. They would credit chance or minor system corrections. The official story would praise procedures and system resilience. But Elias knew the truth, and sometimes truth did not need an audience. Humans did not need recognition. Humans moved. Humans survived. And that night on Helios 9, the human instinct had saved not just a station but an entire crew. In the silence, Elias sat back, exhausted but proud. He had acted when no one else could, and in that simple choice the station and the universe's memory of it was forever changed. The official report called it a minor anomaly. No one had seen the shadow. No one had seen Elias act. Logs showed a slight energy fluctuation in Helios 9's core, then a return to normal operation. Crew records made no mention of fear, no mention of courage. Everything fit neatly into protocol, into logic. But whispers always find their way. A junior analyst noticed discrepancies in system reports. Power surges too precise, too well-directed to be accidental. A medic remembered the smell of ozone and scorched metal, the faint burn on Elias' hands. Tiny clues, easily dismissed, began to circulate among crews, transmitted quietly along trade routes and routine communications. "Did you see the logs?" one engineer asked another. "They don't make sense. Someone must have done something." "They say it's just an anomaly," the other replied, but there was doubt in their voice. Doubt was dangerous in a galaxy that prized certainty, but it was also human, contagious, and impossible to ignore. Soon the story spread, not officially but in fragments. Crew members told each other of a human who moved when all others froze, who risked everything to save the station, who faced something incomprehensible without hesitation. The words were fragmented, missing details, corrupted by retelling, but the essence remained. When humans were involved, instinct and courage became legend even when hidden. Aliens listened, puzzled and unsettled because it defied their calculations. A single human had acted alone and the outcome had been survival. Not luck, not strategy. Action, pure, undeniable action. Elias remained quiet. He had no desire for praise, no desire for recognition. Humans did not need it. His reward was survival itself, and the knowledge that the crew, now alive, owed their lives to movement when waiting would have been certain death. Yet he could feel the ripple. Everywhere his story reached, aliens began to question what they had always believed. Calm, measured species had relied on rules, systems, and patience for generations, and yet they had watched a human succeed where none of them had dared. Some began to speak, quietly at first, in muted conversations. "Maybe we rely too much on protocol. Perhaps instinct has value." "But it is unpredictable," another whispered. Humans had always been seen as chaotic, emotional, sometimes dangerous. But now, in the shadows of whispered stories, they were something else. Dangerous to despair, dangerous to underestimate, dangerous to assume helpless. Elias heard none of these discussions directly, yet he could feel the subtle shift in the galaxy's perception. He had not asked for this. He had not sought admiration. He had acted because there was no other option, because moving when others froze was what humans did. Even among those who denied it, the legend grew. Humans, the fragile, unpredictable species, could survive where others failed. They could move when machines faltered, when logic failed, when fear paralyzed. They could face the unknown and bend it to their will, not through calculation, but through action, courage, and determination. Years later, recruits on other stations would hear fragments of the story. No one named Elias. Officially, the night never happened, but whispers endured, warnings passed from one crew to another. If a human acts, watch carefully. If a human does not ask permission, expect the unexpected. And if a human moves silently in the dark, stand aside. The outcome will change everything. The story spread not as fact but as truth. Facts could be erased, records altered, systems corrupted, but the truth of human courage could not be hidden. Elias moved on, quietly returning to routine, to duty. He was no hero, at least not in the eyes of the galaxy. But the universe had begun to notice humans, not for rules or logic, but for their refusal to wait, for their willingness to act when all others froze. The station continued its orbit, Helios 9's hull scarred but intact. The shadow outside had vanished, leaving no trace, but the human who had faced it, and the whispers that followed, left a mark far more lasting than metal or memory could erase. Humans survived, humans moved, and the story of that night, even if censored, would quietly change the galaxy's understanding forever. Years passed, and Helios 9 became just another station among the stars. New crews rotated in and out, unaware of the night that had nearly ended it all. The official logs told a story of a minor energy surge, handled efficiently by automated systems. Nobody's name appeared, no hero celebrated. The night had been erased on paper. But some remembered, not the records, not the computers, but those who had lived it. The aliens who had frozen in fear carried the memory quietly, though they could not explain it fully. Something about humans lingered in their minds, something unpredictable, uncalculable, almost dangerous. It was instinct, courage, and action all rolled into one. It was impossible to ignore. Elias Mar had returned to routine, working quietly, never boasting, never claiming recognition. He walked the corridors of Helios 9 with the same measured steps, though each one carried the weight of what had happened. He knew the truth. Survival did not require heroism, only action when no one else would. Humans were built for that. Others could calculate, predict, and plan, but humans moved in the face of uncertainty, and the universe had noticed. New recruits were shown the observation ring during orientation. Guides pointed to the stars, speaking carefully. They told stories of past operations, of systems that had failed, of crises managed by protocol. They never mentioned Elias' name. They never told the true story. But their tone changed when they spoke of human crew members. If a human is calm, the guide said, they can surprise you. If a human is afraid, be patient. But if a human moves, silently and without hesitation. The recruits leaned in, sensing something beyond explanation. That is when history changes, the guide finished, voice low. It was a subtle warning, almost lost in the hum of station life, yet it carried truth. Humans were not meant to blend in, to be predictable, to be quiet. Their courage did not need validation. Their instinct did not need permission. Humans moved when others froze, and the results could reshape events on a scale others could never predict. Elias walked past the observation ring, hands tucked into his jacket, eyes on the stars. He remembered the shadowy being that had almost destroyed Helios 9, the frozen alien crew, the core that could have torn the station apart. He remembered the fear, the pain, the exhaustion, and the strange, sharp clarity that came when a choice had to be made. No one had seen him act. No logs recorded his courage. But that did not matter. Humans did not need witnesses. Humans acted because action was life. Humans survived because they refused to wait. A young recruit glanced at him as he passed. There was nothing in the man's expression. No pride, no arrogance, no claim to fame. Yet something about his presence was undeniable. The girl instinctively stepped aside, feeling a shift in the air, a quiet power she could not define. The guide smiled knowingly at the crew, though Elias had not noticed. Humans, she whispered, are never really quiet. They never disappear. And sometimes when they move, nothing in the galaxy remains the same. Elias continued on, mind calm but aware. He would never speak of that night. He would never ask for acknowledgement. But the memory lived in the galaxy, quietly spreading through whispers, small talk, and cautious warnings. The human capacity to act when everything else froze had left a permanent mark, even if erased from records. Somewhere deep in the void, Helios 9 orbited silently, scarred but intact. Its crew lived on, alien and human alike, carrying lessons that words could not capture. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the station, Elias smiled faintly. because humans, he knew, could never truly be delated. They moved, they survived, and when they acted, even the universe itself had no choice but to notice.